It is November 23rd, 2020, and Election Day this year was 20 days ago. Election Day this year took place on November 3rd, but that was 20 days ago because it is now November 23rd, 2020. Now, despite the fact that it has been almost 3 weeks since Election Day actually took place, we still don't know which political party will have control over the Senate next year. We're not sure yet if it's going to be Republicans or Democrats. Now, for the presidential election, we know for a fact that Joe Biden won that by a decent margin. We know for a fact that Joe Biden will have 306 electoral votes and Donald Trump will have 232 electoral votes if there are no faithless electors in the Electoral College, but there is a good chance that there will be at least one or two faithless electors in the Electoral College, so Joe Biden might have slightly less than 306, Donald Trump might have slightly fewer electoral votes than 232, but we know for a fact that Joe Biden will win the presidential election and he will become the 46th president of the United States. We also know for a fact that the Democrats will maintain control over the House, that they will still have more seats in the House than the Republicans will, but they also lost a few seats that they previously had. So we know Democrats control the presidency, Democrats control the House, but who controls the Senate? We don't know that yet. The reason why we don't know that yet, and we're actually not going to know that for another month and a half approximately, is because of the fact that there are two Senate races that have not finished up yet, and they're not going to be done until January 5th of next year, January 5th, 2021. Now, the reason why the winner of these Senate elections have not been decided yet, the winners for the Senate elections in the state of Georgia, they haven't been decided yet because they have to go to runoff elections, and the runoff elections for both of those Senate seats will be taking place on January 5th, 2021. The reason why they had to go to runoff elections in the first place and they weren't able to just decide a winner on November 3rd or in the days after that, the reason is because Georgia has a rule where the winner of the Senate elections have to win at least 50% of the vote. Otherwise, the election has to go to a runoff election. And in both of those Senate races, none of the candidates got a majority of the votes. Neither the normal election nor the special election did any candidate get more than 50% of the votes. And in a runoff election, what happens is if no candidate gets more than 50% of the vote in round one, basically the top two candidates from round one advance to the runoff election, and that way it is guaranteed that one of the candidates will get more than 50% of the vote in that runoff election. Because if there are only two candidates, unless there's a tie, by logical and mathematical necessity, at least one of the candidates has to get more than 50% of the vote. So in the normal Senate election, it'll be David Perdue versus John Ossoff, and in the special election, it'll be Kelly Loeffler versus Raphael Warnock. In the normal election, David Perdue's the Republican incumbent, John Ossoff is the Democratic challenger, while in the special election, Kelly Loeffler is the Republican incumbent, Raphael Warnock is the Democratic challenger. Now, both of these Senate races are going to be very important, and the reason for that is because they will decide who has control over the Senate. In the normal election, David Perdue is the Republican incumbent, and in the special election, Kelly Loeffler is the Republican incumbent. So currently, as I speak on November 23rd, 2020, the Democrats have won 48 Senate seats in the 2020 Senate elections, and the Republicans have won 50 Senate seats in the 2020 Senate elections, which means that if the Republicans win both seats, they will have 52 seats. If the Democrats win one seat, the Republicans win another seat. Then the Republicans will have 51 seats, the Democrats will have 49 seats. But if the Democrats win both seats, it'll be a 50-50 exact tie in the Senate. Republicans 50 seats, Democrats 50 seats. Now, here's why the Senate race is so important and will determine which party has control over the Senate. If the Democrats win both of the Senate seats and they have 50 seats in the Senate and the Republicans have 50 seats in the Senate, whoever actually controls the Senate is basically the party that controls the presidency. Why is that the case? Well, in the case that there's a 50-50 tie in the Senate on a specific bill, the vice president is actually the person who casts the tiebreaker vote. So if Democrats vote on one way and the Republicans vote the other way, then the vice president is who casts the tiebreaker vote because there's an even number of senators in the Senate. And since we know for a fact that Joe Biden won the presidency, we know for a fact that Kamala Harris will be the vice president of the United States. And since she's a Democrat, she's a lot more likely to side with the Democrats than she is with the Republicans on a specific issue. So if the Democrats can just get to 50 seats in the Senate, then that is enough for them to essentially have control over the Senate. Because whenever there is a tie in the Senate, Republicans vote one way, Democrats vote the other way, Kamala Harris is going to side with the Democrats a lot more than she'll side with the Republicans, which means that Democrats will essentially have control over the Senate if they get to 50 Senate seats. Like I said earlier in this video, the Democrats are currently sitting at 48 seats in the Senate, while the Republicans are sitting at 50 seats in the Senate, and if Democrats win both of these Senate races, that'll get the Democrats to 50 seats in the Senate, and the Republicans will remain at 50 seats, which means that if Democrats win both of those Senate races in Georgia, that'll be enough for them to have control over the Senate. But the Democrats have to win both of them, otherwise the Republicans will still have control of the Senate. The Republicans only need one of those Senate races to be won by them in order to reach 51 seats, while the Democrats have to win both of those Senate races in order to get to 50 seats. So, like I said, these Senate races actually, because there's two of them that are taking place on the same day, kind of like on November 3rd, how people who lived in Georgia had to vote on two Senate races on the same day. They will have to do that again on January 5th, vote in the normal election, and then right afterwards vote in the special election for the Georgia Senate races. I wanted to take a look in this video at some recent polling that came out relating to these Senate races. So there aren't really many polls out yet for these Senate races. After Election Day took place and it was figured out that there would be runoff elections for both of these Senate races, only 2 polls for each of these Senate races have been released. One of the pairs was on November 11th, the other pair was on November 17th, but I'm going to talk about it quickly. So if I look at the ones on November 11th, it looks like one of them was for the normal election, one of them was for the special election. And these polls were by a Republican-leaning polling place, it seems. They have an R next to their name, which means that they are more Republican-leaning, which could mean that the results that they obtain in these polls could lean slightly towards Republicans, slightly in favor of Republicans. But nonetheless, I still think that it's good to look at. It's good to look at the results of these polls. And what's more important is we take a look at the average of all the different polls. Right now, there's not enough polling information in order to get a good average, so we're not going to have a good idea of who's actually going to win these Senate races just based off these 2 polls. But 2 polls per Senate race, so four polls in total. But I think it's still a good idea to look at these polls and look at how things are going for the Democrats and how things are going for the Republicans. So, for the first pair of polls that were released on November 11th by this Republican-leaning polling place, they put David Perdue winning by 4 percentage points and Kelly Loeffler winning by 1 percentage point. So according to this poll, David Perdue got 50% of the vote, while Jon Ossoff got 46% of the vote. Meanwhile, Raphael Warnock got 48% of the vote, and Kelly Loeffler got 49% of the vote in those specific polls. Keep this in mind, they are just 2 different polls for 2 different Senate races, 1 poll each. 1 poll on its own is not at all a good way to determine who's going to win. Several different polls have to be taken on a specific Senate race or presidential race in order to actually have a good idea of which candidate has a better chance of winning. So 1 poll or even 2 polls on a specific race is not enough to have a good idea of who will win that specific race. So we're going to have to wait until more polls come in. I would expect that in the coming weeks, especially in December, maybe even like mid to late December, we'll start seeing a lot more polls come in for these Senate races as the Senate race draws closer, because the Senate race is still a month and a half away. It's early January, we're at late November right now. It would make sense that the Senate races aren't that big of a focus yet. I guess a lot of people are still focusing on the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election, but we'll see in the coming weeks. I would assume that you're going to start seeing more polls for these Senate races. So the first set of polls had David Perdue up by 4 points and Kelly Loeffler up by 1 point. These results, like I said, might be slightly in favor of the Republicans because it is a Republican-leaning polling place, but I still think that it's a good source to look at. And also keep this in mind, Georgia is a bit more of a conservative state, so the Republican incumbents have a slightly better chance of winning these Senate races than the Democratic challengers do, in my opinion. I mean, Biden was able to pull off a surprise victory at the presidential level in the state of Georgia, but I don't think that will necessarily translate to wins in the Senate, but we'll have to see. Next, we have polls from Fox 5/Insider Advantage, and these polls were both released on November 17th, which was 6 days ago, last Tuesday, and there was 1 poll for the special election, 1 poll for the normal election, and the normal election has David Perdue and Jon Ossoff at a dead tie. Both of them have 49% of the vote, and I would assume the other 2% would be from people just not knowing which candidate they support more because there aren't any third party candidates in this runoff election. By definition, a runoff election can only have two candidates, and in this instance, it's one Democrat, one Republican. So, David Perdue, John Ossoff, dead tie, 49-49. But look at the special election. Raphael Warnock is actually up by 1 percentage point. In this poll, Raphael Warnock got 49% of the votes, while Kelly Loeffler only got 48% of the votes. So, Raphael Warnock is actually ahead by a percentage point in that specific poll. But two polls is not good enough, like I said, to get a good picture of which candidate's actually doing better. We need to wait for more polls to come in, but I'm just going to tell you right now, I think that the Republicans in these Senate races have a much better chance of winning than the Democrats do. Even though Georgia voted for Biden in the presidential election, I don't think it's likely that they vote for the Democrats in the Senate elections. If you look at the round 1 elections that took place on November 3rd, you'll see that in the normal election, David Perdue won by 1 to 2 percentage points against John Ossoff, and Raphael Warnock, he did get the most amount of votes, but that is because the Republican votes got split between two candidates, Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler. Out of the two Republican candidates, Kelly Loeffler did better, and that's why she advanced to round 2, but I would assume that most of the people who voted for Doug Collins will eventually put their support behind Kelly Loeffler. Some of them might not. As you may know, Kelly Loeffler did get herself involved in a major scandal earlier this year, and that might cause some people who supported Doug Collins to not support Kelly Loeffler, even though she's also a Republican, just because they don't like the kind of scandal she got herself involved in. But a lot of the people will probably support Kelly Loeffler when all is said and done. But what is the takeaway from these two polls? First of all, Raphael Warnock has a better chance of winning his Senate race than John Ossoff does. There's a better chance of Democrats winning the special election than the normal election in the state of Georgia, and that is just because of the scandal that Kelly Loeffler got herself involved in. That is the main reason why I think Raphael Warnock actually has a somewhat decent chance of winning the Senate race. A lot of people do not approve of Kelly Loeffler, mainly because of her scandal, but also she wasn't even elected in the first place. She is not the current senator in the state of Georgia because she got elected. She's the current senator in that state because the governor of the state, Brian Kemp, appointed her to that position after Johnny Isakson, the previous senator from the state of Georgia, retired at the end of last year. So Johnny Isakson retired at the end of last year, and then after he retired, Kelly Loeffler was appointed to fill that Senate seat, and she's only been serving in that Senate seat since the beginning of this year, and she was never elected. So because of that, a lot of people might not really support Kelly Loeffler, but in the case of David Perdue, I think that he has a better chance of winning his election than Kelly Loeffler does because of the fact that, first of all, he was elected to that position, and second of all, he's been serving in that seat for a lot more than just 1 year. But the other takeaway from this is that it is a pretty close match between the Republicans and the Democrats in both of these Senate races, especially in the special election. It's a really close match. It's basically neck and neck between the two candidates. In the normal election, I will admit, the Republicans have quite a bit of a better chance of winning than the Democrats do. David Perdue definitely has quite a bit better of a chance of winning than John Ossoff does. John Ossoff does not have a very good chance of winning, and this does mean that Democrats will most likely not have control of the Senate because keep in mind, Democrats have to win both of these Senate races in order to have control over the Senate. Otherwise, Republicans will have 51 or 52 seats in the Senate. So, more likely than not, Democrats will not have control of the Senate, but Republicans will. And that is because David Perdue is a lot more likely to win that Senate race than John Ossoff is. But also keep in mind, there's always the chance that Democrats could pull off a surprise win and win both of those Senate races and have control over the Senate. I mean, how many of us were really expecting Joe Biden to win the state of Georgia? I certainly wasn't. In all my prediction videos, I gave Georgia either lean Trump or likely Trump. I never put it as tilt Trump. I never put it towards Biden. I expected Florida to go towards Biden, but Florida voted for Trump. But for some reason, Georgia voted for Biden. That doesn't really make sense to me, but regardless, that is what the reality is. Georgia, in fact, did vote for Joe Biden, and there is a chance that Georgia could vote for Democrats in these Senate races.